My name is Martin Matter with the Witness to War Foundation. It is March 27th, 2014, and we are in Hiawassee, Georgia. I'm sitting with Mr. Peter Leaming, Peterleaming, who served in World War II and the Korean War in the United States Army, 24th Infantry Division, 19th Regimental Combat Team. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you.
Wonderful. My first question is, where are you from originally?
New Zealand.
And tell me about your life growing up and how you came to America.
Well, I grew up on a dairy farm in New Zealand. We had cows. Now I'm going back before the time that we even had electricity. We had to milk the cows by hand in those days. I do remember when I was 8 or 9, I guess, we got electricity and a milking machine to milk the cows, and we finally put a roof on the barn so we didn't have to milk the cows out when it was raining. And I grew up, I walked, if you believe, or ran 3 miles to school and 3 miles home again, of course. No school buses in those days. Going back a long time.
And tell me about your family.
My father was a farmer, and my stepmother, and he ran the farm. He had 157 acres, I believe. And things were tough. Things were tough, very tough in those days. But we managed to get through. We grew most of our own food and killed our own meat for the main. When the war was on, I was very anxious to be a part of it, of course. It's sort of considered, or it was then, considered to be somewhat of a disgrace to be drafted. All able-bodied men were expected to enlist, and I did. When I was 17 and a half, I got permission from my father to go in, and I went into the Royal New Zealand Air Force. We did boot camp at a place called Harewood in Christchurch, Auckland, or rather Christchurch, New Zealand. And from there I was posted to the Pacific.
And what sort of things did you see while you served in the Pacific?
Very vague. It's very vague as you get older. But I do remember a couple of items. One, I was with a fellow named Frank Lloyd. For some reason, we were just like twins. Wherever he was posted or I was posted, the other one was there. And we moved up through the Pacific to Guadalcanal. We were there. The Marines had done a great job there. In fact, I understand that Tojo's son was killed there. And an interesting thing was that he was buried under 10 feet of soil and into his ribs they had put a pipe. And on top of the pipe they had welded a helmet, and they called it a urinal. They called it a gonophone. And there was a little sign there that invited you to partake of the use of this particular little item, and I did. But I understand that when Tojo heard about it, it's a big insult for Japanese, big insult, and he almost went crazy. Later on, I believe they caught him coming down on a visit, and they shot him down too. Another little item that was there, that the natives were short, stocky, almost naked, and made use of anything that we threw away. They were on top of it in a big way, and they made use of it. We didn't get moved on as I thought we should, and after some 2 or 3 weeks, we kept pounding at the door. Why aren't Frank Lloyd and myself being moved? We were the only two that were behind. People had come through and gone on, and we were still there. Perhaps they lost our manifest, or what they did, I don't know, but we eventually got moved on up to Bougainville. And that's where I spent the latter part of the war. When we heard they had dropped the atom bomb, we looked at each other and said, well, what's an atom bomb? Because none of us knew about any such thing. And then we heard they dropped the second one, which of course ended the war, and for which we were grateful, and we were posted home. Now, when we got back to Santos, going home, we were posted to fly out the next day on a Catalina, a flying boat, and for some reason we were bumped. Both of us didn't have enough juice, apparently. Somebody else had more juice than we did, and they bumped us, and they were on the plane. That plane took off and was never heard from again. And to this day, no one even knows what happened to it, whether it blew up or what it did, but it just disappeared. And so, but for the grace of God, well, I would have been on that plane. So here I am. But after all these years, it's still sort of fresh in my mind that these people that bumped us, fortunately, they did bump us, or I wouldn't be here.
Just to go back a little bit, what made you decide to join the Air Force, say, versus being in infantry? Did you have some sort of aviation experience prior to joining?
I wanted to fly. There was a British ace, or a New Zealand ace actually, in the British, he called Cobber Kane, and I wanted to, at that age, I wanted to emulate him, of course. When I went in to be examined for pilot training, they looked into my eyes and found out that I wasn't able to fly because of a problem with the left eye. Incidentally, I've got a pilot's license now. I've learned to fly since and had a pilot's license. But then I wasn't able to, according to the doctor. And it was some rare thing that I guess they could have corrected it today, but in those days they couldn't.
So after World War II, what happened to you?
After World War II, I went to, did various jobs around New Zealand, and then I went across to Australia. I thought I'd have a look around over in Australia. And I looked around, and I wound up in a place called Alice Springs, which is in the central part of the Australian desert. And I worked there for a little while, various jobs. And then I moved on up to Darwin, which is in the northern part of the state, of the country. And it was there that I decided that I was going to go back down to Sydney and continue my travels. I didn't really know what I was going to do. It's one of those things you just do. So I went back down to Sydney, and I got a job on the ship called the Balola, and that was a mistake. The man that was the head cook, and I was his assistant, was gutter-born, I believe, and real foul of mouth and just hard to get along with. But he'd dirty a pot, pour it from one pot to the next, dirty that pot and pour it, and give me all the pots to wash. So each night when I had to clean the pot out and scrape the residue over the side of the ship, the pots would accidentally slip from my hand and be lost in the ocean. Pretty soon he ran short of pots, obviously, and he got the message, which made life just a little bit easier. We went through the Panama Canal and came up towards Boston, and that's when we hit a typhoon. And that was the one time in my life I was really scared. You could sit up on top of a wave and look straight down almost into the depths of the ocean, and you couldn't see the bottom because it was dark. And the next minute you're on top of the wave, and there's nothing there at all. And the ship was rolling side to side and pitching forward and back. You couldn't sleep. It was just impossible. I understand even the captain got a little scared. But we made port into Boston, and when I was in Boston, I decided I was going to jump ship. And when we got back to New York, I did jump. I jumped ship and spent about 30 days on shore with nothing to do and no money. I lived for the first one of the weeks I lived in about, I think, 2 or 3 cups of coffee and a bowl of soup for the whole week. It was rough. And one morning I didn't know what I was going to do. The 2 guys walked up to me, and they were the FBI. And they started questioning me about who I was and where were my papers and so on, and I had none, of course. So I figured I was going to be taken in and deported. And I said to them, I said, you know, I would like to volunteer for the military. If they take me, would that be acceptable? And they looked at each other and had a little talk for a moment and said, we're going to go that way. You go that way. And they told me where to go up to the Salvation Army home, and I did. And I was there for about a week. Came down and was inducted into the Army. Now, I guess they didn't, I don't think they called it volunteering, but regardless, I was inducted in, and that's when I got my first real glimpse of America and Americans. I began to understand a lot of things.
Like what?
The language, for one thing. Many of them didn't understand me, and I didn't understand them. When I got into the military, I went down to Aberdeen, Maryland. They moved me down there. And I had been without food and proper sustenance for so long that I got very sick, because they used to keep us out in the cold. And so I spent about a week in the hospital recovering, getting good sustenance and good food, rest, and warmth. When I came out, I was posted, and this was the first group that had blacks and whites in the same barrack. And I was one of the pioneers in that. And some of the black people I just didn't understand at all. For instance, do you know what a daddy's car is? It's a daddy's car. I didn't understand, you know, some of these words, they talk about, have you got any bread? And they didn't mean stuff that you eat, they meant money. Many things. I heard the head man was a corporal, and I don't remember his name, Trip something, but he used that the MF word, and he used it constantly, and I had never heard the word before, and I was flabbergasted, because this is about as horrible a word as I could ever imagine. But I went through the training, and when I got through, they called me aside and asked me if I'd like to be a drill instructor. And that's what I wound up being for the next couple of groups. But I kept asking the captain, or rather the lieutenant, a fellow named Lieutenant Shipley, if I could be posted overseas. And finally he agreed, and they sent me by train in a train. It was called the Flying Banana, the Southern Pacific Railroad. It was a yellow train, sent me across the United States, and from there I was posted on over to Japan and Korea. Incidentally, going across the ocean on that trip, we struck another typhoon, the second one I've had, and everybody was sick. When I had gone on board, I had gone to the top bunk. There were 5 bunks in a row, and everybody wanted to know, why are you going to the top bunk? I said, when we get out to sea, you'll find out. When the ship rolls like this and somebody's in the top bunk and vomits, guess who gets it all? The guy on the bottom bunks. So then they understood why I was on the top bunk. I began to see what was happening in the mess hall. Everybody was, it was awful, sick. So I volunteered to guard a hatch going out onto the deck. So nobody was allowed out, so I said, I'll be the guard. Every once in a while I could crack the door and take a nice deep breath of fresh, salty air, and then shut the door. So that's how I got across the ocean there. We landed in Japan, and the rest of it, what happened in Japan is kind of fuzzy at the beginning. The next thing I remember was we were on a boat to Busan, and we went ashore there at Busan. We were put on a train, a cattle car, with rifles and etc., but no ammunition. And we were told that we might be attacked at any time, which made us feel really comfortable. As you can imagine, no ammunition to shoot back. But the thing moved along up through to a place called, if I remember rightly, was Watchung. And later learned that particular city had been blown off the map for some reason. We camped outside in tents, as best I can remember. And I was posted to the 57th Military Police as an enforcer. And after several months of that, I just didn't want that. So they gave me another job guarding POWs at a camp. And I don't remember the exact location of that, but I remember seeing these poor devils in this cage with, they were probably better off than they had been, but they were emaciated, they were half starved, they looked terrible. And I kept begging the commanding officer for a transfer to a forward outfit. And he finally got sick of me bothering him so much, and he finally just shipped me out, and that's when I got shipped up to the Regimental Combat Team, which was a 4.2 mortar outfit. And we were just right up on the front line on the 38th parallel.
I'd like to go back just a minute. And what was your job as an enforcer for the 57th Military Police?
Catching speeders. We had a little gadget on the side of the road with a mirror, and another one at the other end was another mirror, and we had walkie-talkies. So the guy'd say, "There's a guy coming through," and I'd click, and then he'd come through the other mirror at the other end, click. We'd look at the chart, and he's doing more than 20 miles an hour, he gets arrested. And sort of a radar, a modern day radar today, very unfair. 20 miles an hour was crazy. On those roads, it was crazy. You were in a hurry, you weren't allowed to do more than 20 miles an hour, it was crazy.
Was that on a base or just?
No, this was out on the highway, between places. Because Korea is a fairly big place. That you might find somebody on his way up to the combat zone, and he's going up there with the driver, and he gets himself a ticket for drive speed. It was crazy. But that's what they did. So.
And then you were guiding POWs. Were these Korean prisoners?
Yeah, North Korean prisoners. They were, like I said, they were a sorry-looking bunch. If ever I felt sorry for anybody in my life, I felt sorry for those guys. Really sorry for them. But,
and why is that?
Well, the way they looked, what they'd been through, and they didn't have hardly anything to wear, clothes-wise. It was cold. I mean, you got to figure out it gets cold in Korea. I mean, really cold. 20 below is the norm. And these poor guys had nothing, and we had nothing to give them.
And how did they behave?
Well, they were glad it was over. I'm sure they were glad it was over. But they had dysentery and all kinds of things. I think some of them must have died. I don't know. I wasn't in the know on all that, but it was bad. And they were better off, I'm sure, than when they had been in the units before them. We heard stories about them, charging into our machine guns and stuff with no ammunition, just maybe a sword or a hoe or a rake or a stick, And so obviously, I guess perhaps, I don't know, we were told, and perhaps they had only they were drugged, and I never knew for sure, because none of this stuff's, no one's going to admit it. They're not going to admit it now even, so.
So tell me about joining the Regimental Combat Team. That was a mortar platoon, correct?
Repeat, please.
Tell me more about the Regimental Combat Team. That was a mortar platoon, correct?
Yes, 4.2 mortars. We had a position on one side of the front line. The front line was just over the mountain, and we had a fellow there named Johnny Weaver, who was born and raised someplace, I think Okeechobee, born in South Florida somewhere. He claimed that when he got out of Korea, he would never go north of Okeechobee because it was so cold. And I don't think, to my knowledge, I saw him years later, and he hadn't. But it was a team, and my job was to unpack the mortar around and pass it to the man who put it in there, who dropped it down the tube. They would give us instructions of how to adjust the things, and then they would just say, somebody would hang the mortar up on the thing, and before he let it go, he'd just say, hanging up, and everybody would block their ears, and he'd fire, and it was gone. We never knew what we were hitting or what we were aiming at, except for what the forward observer told us. And later on, I became a forward observer. I went up with a fellow named Ballard. We went up onto the front line, and I slept on the front line up there one night, outside. There was no place for me to sleep, and it was close to 40 below, I'd say, which is kind of cool. And I didn't know if I was going to make it that night. I had all my clothes on, and I had every piece of equipment or anything I could get my hands on to cover myself up and sleep in the snow. It was cold. And to this day, I've never had warm feet. I've got cold feet even to this day, and cold hands. My hands and feet just don't seem to want to be part of me.
Were you given World War II surplus items, or were you given some newer materials to wear?
Equipment was short. Short. I don't know whether it was World War II or what it was, but we were short on equipment, very short. And if the only way that we kept warm around the fires at night, and we had a fire, we were out in the open, we could be shot at and seen easily, but it was that or freeze to death. And I remember standing in the fire until your boots would start to smolder. And then you'd get out and stamp them in the snow and put them out and back into the fire. We had my fellow named McGuire, whom I've been unable to trace over all these years, if he's still living, and I were in a bunker together. We built a bunker out of 4.2 mortar crates, boxes, filled full of soil, and then logs on top and sacking or whatever we could get, and dirt on top of that. Whenever the mortars went off, of course, some of the soil came down inside. We had a little furnace down inside. For the first time we had a fire. We had a little fireplace where we kept fire, but one night the flames came out and burned the bunker. So of course, I had my teeth out in a little cup alongside of me, and my false teeth, they were lost. But of course, whenever there's a fire, there's always one thing that you always take, if there's a fire or you're in trouble or there's a bomb, you know what it is? You always take your fork or your spoon. Your rifle is secondary. It comes next. But you always take something because you got to eat. So anyhow, I lost everything in that fire, including my teeth. Back to the rear I went to get a new set of teeth, which took me about a week. While I was back in the rear, and I don't remember where the rear was offhand, but I had to go to the bathroom. So I go down there, and it was cold, sitting down there, with your pants off, it's cold. So I peeked in the officers' latrine. They had heaters. Now, whether their posteriors were more sacred than mine, I don't know. But it didn't seem fair to me that they had warm posteriors and mine was cold. It didn't seem fair. So before I went back, they were missing a couple of carburetors and a few pieces of pipe off their Jeeps, and I managed to find a 104 ammunition box about J square, and I got somebody to cut a couple of holes in the top and cut the ends of a couple of 105 shell rounds, made a chimney, and I went back up to the front and with my new set of teeth, And I put the box in there and put the carburetor in, and had diesel, just drip, drip, drip. I had a nice fire. My bunker was probably up in the 60s. And whenever a Jeep or anything came into town that was diesel, they were missing a 5-gallon can usually when they went to eat or something. I can say it now. I couldn't say it then. I'd have been court-martialed. But anyhow, unfortunately, when it's thawed in the spring, all the cans, they found all the empty cans, and the jig was up. But
did you get in any trouble for any of that?
No, never. I was relieved, but one thing that did stand out, and I wrote an article on it, was Christmas lunch of 51. Christmas 51. We had, well, mostly the food came in by South Korean bearers. They walked in, and by the time they got the food there, of course, it was not very hot. But we had this plate, and we were served all the goodies. The pie and the potatoes and all that stuff that went with it. And by the time I got back to where I was sitting, because we couldn't take it in, we couldn't go inside and eat. We were sitting outside eating, hunched over like this so that it was snowing. I mean, it was coming down. You couldn't see what you were eating. So you'd put your fork in there and you might get a piece of potato and you might get a piece of pie. It didn't matter. But it was one of the best Christmas dinners that I think I ever had. Because, and it stands out of my mind, that one really stands out of my mind, that we were relieved. I don't remember when we were relieved. I was in Korea 5 months. Five months, and we got moved back to Japan to regroup or whatever they decided they wanted us to do.
Tell me more about being a forward operator, and what sort of enemy forces did you spot?
You didn't see them hardly at all. The one that saw them mostly was a major, and I don't know whether he was a full dollar or not, but he sniped with a 50 caliber machine gun. He could see them because he had a telescope, and at night you'd see them, moving their stuff at along dusk, and along at night you could see them. But he would sit down there and he would, all of a sudden he'd move the machine gun around, he'd go, and he'd jump up and down, I got him, He was a major. And you're not going to argue with the poor guy. I think he was just a little off. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was just a good shot with a 50 caliber, but it always seemed to me just a little strange that the idea of being a forward observer was to find the enemy and have them drop in a smoke bomb. From the smoke bomb, you could determine the way the wind was blowing, for one thing, and you could find out whether they had to raise it 2 clicks or drop it 2 clicks or to the right or the left and so on. And then you could send in the various kind of stuff. You could send in HE, which was immediately explodes upon impact, a variable time fuse, which is a VT, which exploded above the air at so many feet above the ground. And then there was delayed action, which went into the ground and exploded. So you had a choice of the three ammunitions. And like I say, it was pretty much at night. We couldn't see if we were being effective or not. I suppose we were, but we couldn't see it. And then they had the quads, which was a series of 450 caliber machine guns mounted on a truck that would fire over the mountain. And they couldn't see what they were shooting because they were firing up over the mountain just on a certain, they were told what to shoot at, and they shot. But you really couldn't see if you were hitting anything or not.
Now, you listed that you were in 2 major battles on the 38th parallel. Could you tell me about what happened during those battles?
Pretty much what I've just told you. They didn't tell us that we were in a battle. They just had us supporting them by I guess the troops were a little bit further out than we were. We heard other stories, of course. We heard some of the radio stuff. But to actually pin a battle down, I can't tell you. I don't know what they were.
Were there any other former New Zealanders or Australians or people from your region in your unit or in the military that you ever met?
No other New Zealanders. The only other people I ever met were the Turks, and I didn't understand them. These guys saved ears as souvenirs. They'd get the enemy and take the ears off and stick them on. Pretty bloodthirsty people, but they were hell of a fighters. I wouldn't want to argue with them.
And how were you accepted in the American military?
I had no problem with that. My nickname, of course, was Kiwi. Like Kiwi is what a New Zealander is. I used the nickname Kiwi. A lot of them said they had trouble understanding me for a long time, until I learned the American vernacular and how to drop certain words and pick up certain, syllables and stuff. You might be having trouble. I don't know. No trouble. A lot of people still tell me I speak with an accent. I don't hear the accent, and I don't hear American accents. But I was well accepted. They wouldn't have made me a drill instructor if I hadn't have been, I guess. Did the job, that's what counted.
I want to get back to the drill instructor thing in a little bit, but tell me about your last couple of weeks in Korea and what that was like.
Christmas and the day that we were relieved, they came in, a group came in, and I've got a picture somewhere of the guy that came in. Let me explain something else to you first. You couldn't wash clothes there in Korea. You couldn't wash your clothes, because if you hung them out to dry, they'd freeze. And the minute they froze, and you could break, it sounds silly that you can break you can break your clothes, but you could break them. So the only thing that you could do is maybe wash a bit of your underwear if you had any, and you could try to dry it in your bunker or on your, if you washed it, you'd just leave it on and let it dry on your body. By the fact that we used an oil lamp in the basement, which was a number 10 can with a piece of rope stuck on the top and diesel put in the middle, and you just light that was your light. But it's also very smoky, and this would put smoke onto your vehicle. And my clothes were pretty much black from the dirt and the smoke and everything else. The new guy that came in he had lovely fresh overalls, and he looked sharp. I don't know how long he'd look sharp afterwards, but he looked sharp until he'd been there a few days, I suppose. It was a great relief. Over there, you'd always talk to a man, you'd say, "How short are you?" And he would say, 2 weeks and 10 days, before he got an hour or got to go home, depending on how short you were. We knew that when those guys came in, we were out of there, and we were thankful.
And tell me about your trip home. What was it like for you?
Trip home. After spending about a year in Japan, don't remember much about the trip home. I remember playing a lot of chess. I liked chess, and I did then. I remember playing a lot of chess on the way home. I don't even remember where we landed. I don't even remember where I was discharged. That's strange, isn't it? Seems to me we came back to New York or New Jersey someplace, if I remember rightly. First thing I have is remembering being out of the military and going on a train to a place called Great Barrington, Great Barrington up in Massachusetts, to a friend of mine. And I spent a few days with him, and then I went back to, it's fuzzy. Yeah, I remember winding up in Rochester, New York, which is where the first time I started to become clear again. I had been writing to a girl up there, and I went up there to see her and wound up staying there for the next 15 or 16 years, working as a roofing contractor. And during that time, I also got onto the police department and became a police officer. But as for the trip back, it's just fuzzy. I just don't remember.
Well, just a couple more questions. Do you have any stories about being a drill instructor that you'd like to share?
As a drill instructor.
And what made you decide to be a drill instructor?
I didn't decide to become a drill instructor.
Oh, that's right. They asked you to.
They decided that I was, I don't know, mean enough or had the right voice, or my voice is going on me now. But most of those guys that came in the military, going through the group that I was with in Maryland, did not want to be there. They were, what do you call them, conscripted or inducted or whatever you want to call them. They were conscripted. They were brought in. They were physically made to come in. To my way of understanding and to my way of thinking, I could not understand someone who doesn't want to fight for his country. And it was their country at that point, not mine. It is my country now. But back in those days, I was sort of a mercenary in another country. And I remember feeling I couldn't feel sorry for those guys. They came in and I made them run. I was probably mean. I remember one thing in particular, just one item I can remember. We were on the firing range, and somebody came around with a rifle and said, "This thing is jammed, Corporal, this thing's jammed." And he pointed that thing right at me. And I didn't, it was just an automatic reflex. I just went out with my hand like that and I belted him across the side of the face, knocked him flat. And then I said, uh-oh, I'm in a heap of trouble now. And the captain walked over and said, "What's the trouble?" And I told him. He said, he turned around and walked away, so I didn't see anything. Praise the Lord for an understanding captain. But he could have court-martialed me. And one of the other little tricks I had was to give someone push-ups. Get down and give me 10. Well, when I think his lieutenant colonel came by and he saw me doing this, he said, "You can't do that, Corporal, you can't do that unless you do it with them." I got pretty good at push-ups, I'll tell you. I give you 10 push-ups, I get down, so I got, so now give me 10. And some of them couldn't give you 2. We had one guy there that couldn't give you any. He'd get down and there was just no way he was going to get up. He didn't last long in the service. Oh, one other thing. We had a nice little fellow, maybe I shouldn't tell you this. A fairy came into the group, and he wanted to perform on all the troops. And he didn't last very long either. He just, I don't know what it's like now, but I know what it was like then, and wasn't very highly thought about. But something that I hadn't thought about in a long time.
What was the strangest thing you ever saw, either as a drill instructor or while you were overseas in Korea?
The strangest thing? Well, there was nothing strange while I was in base. I might add here that while I was on base, somebody suggested to me that I go to school and get my GED. And I don't know who that guy was, but I'd like to praise his name, because I went ahead and got it, and it stood me in good stead later. Strangest thing I saw, I think, in Korea was some of the underground bunkers. These people lived under the ground like rabbits. And they had cities under the ground, whole hospitals, a whole bit all under the ground. Strange. I never got to go into them, but I remember seeing some of them, and like they go into a hole like a rabbit. And I don't like being underground. The only time I want to be underwater is under the shower.
Did you have any memorable experiences with Korean citizens?
Yeah, one of the things they did over there was, if you'd be driving along, the Korean would stand on the side of the road, and at the last minute he would jump right in front of your truck. And sometimes they got hit. And I finally found out what they were doing. These people were being followed by a devil. And the idea was, if they could just miss being hit by themselves, the devil would be right behind them and he would get hit and he'd be dead. Does that make sense to you? It didn't make any sense to me at the time. But other things were the fact that the GIs took advantage of the women. I never did. But the GIs, a lot of the GIs did. They had little places there for the ladies. They would sneak off and do whatever they do. I don't know. I wasn't interested in that sort of thing, and I'm still not. But one other thing I remember quietly was, and I don't even remember where it was, but someone gave me a bottle of whiskey. And apparently they had a way of, you could always tell if the top had been tampered with. They couldn't fix that. They had a way of drilling the bottom out somehow and getting the stuff out and putting rot gut in there and then sealing the bottom back up. And most people never looked at the bottom of the bottle. They looked at the top, you know. I drank some of this stuff. And it probably would have killed me. But there was a guy there that walked me around, up and down, up and down. He said, you can't go to sleep, up and down, until the stuff wore off. And I don't know who that was. All I knew was, all I knew, his name was Lofty. That's all I remember. Long time ago. You're bringing stuff out that I'd never thought about in years. Yeah.
That just means I'm doing a good job.
Mm-hmm. You're doing a good job.
Did you have any leader that particularly inspired you while you were in the military?
Yeah, there was one guy in Korea. He was top sergeant. A fellow named Mackenzie, and he was by the book. And I went by one morning there, and instead of being the top sergeant, he was now a second lieutenant, battlefield commission. And I didn't know till you see something like that, you never know that it really happens. You know, that takes me back to something else. A fellow named General Hodges, I think it was his name. I might be wrong. It's long. But somebody came to town, and the captain that was with him had every medal in the book except the Medal of Honor. And I believe he got it later, but it killed him to get it. I don't know whether that's good memory or not. I have pictures of some of these things at home. Boy, it's hard to remember some of this stuff. I'll let you ask the next question.
Sure thing. Just one last question. Did you learn any valuable lesson or piece of advice that you'd like to pass on to the next generations?
Yes, I can tell you one thing. That war itself is the stupidest thing that mankind does. I cannot think of anything so stupid as for two guys to get out there and fight over a little piece of land or something else, or you insulted me and I'm going to insult you and we're going to fight. It's crazy. If anybody wants to know anything about war at all, let them go down to Decatur in Georgia and walk through the Veterans Hospital. You'll see men without arms and without legs and blind and insane and all smashed up in wheelchairs, and it's pitiful. Men will go into a battle, and the battle might last a day or 2 days, but the people that were in the battle on both sides suffer for 60, 70, 80 years afterwards. And it's pathetic. And I'm just hoping that the people that run the show will get some sense. I just hope that they will no longer want to fight. We're taught biblically to love our enemies, and that's sometimes hard to do, but it makes good sense. And I think that would be, I'd like to see no more wars, no more fighting. Let's live together in peace.
Well, do you have any other closing statements or anything else that you might like to add?
I'm just thankful for this wonderful country I live in. I'm an American through and through right now. I just wrote an article for the paper, and they published it that I am an American, thank God. Not that I don't have ties to my former country of New Zealand, I do, but this country's been good to me, and I've worked hard since I've been here and made a good life, had a good family life. I would like to encourage everybody to treat the country well. It's not a case of what can my country do for you, as Kennedy would say. It's probably right now, the way things are, it's a case of what is the country doing to me. But really it is, what can I do for my country is what it should be. And it's a shame that we can't get along. Now, all the different colors in this country, all the different religions, it's a shame that we just don't all get along. And we should. It was the way God intended it. So, as far as I'm concerned, I've lived my life, a good life. It's been a good life, and I'd like to encourage others to do the same thing and see the bigger picture.
Well, I'd just like to say this country would not be anything without people like you, both immigrants and veterans who served our country bravely. I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. It's been an honor and a pleasure, but most importantly, I'd like to thank you very much for your service.
You're very welcome indeed.